Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Rahul Verma. I work here at the Center for Policy Research, and I'm joined today by my partner in crime, Neelanjan Sarkar. Both of us have been doing this election analysis after the day of results for last 5 years, and hopefully we'll continue this tradition if the building remains and we as a community of scholars remain here, but some of those are under the weather at the moment. This is, I think, the 10th or 11th edition of How India Votes series. We have promised that in the run-up to 2024 elections, we'll try to put a series of conversations on how Indians vote. I overpromised, I said 24, hopefully by March, April 2024, when Lok Sabha elections start, we would have reached to that level. So every conversation is basically picking up on a different theme. The last conversation in the last month, we actually talked about whether foreign policy choices and those issues matter for domestic politics. Today, we are going to talk about a little bit of conversation on some of the states that we had elections in, the 5 states, but also can we glean some sort of like pattern and themes that basically make up voting choices in India? And hopefully towards the end of the month, we'll have another round of conversation on either women voters or whether how money shapes electoral politics in India. So what I'm going to do is, Neelan and I both, I'll start with some sort of like big picture takeaways, and those are my takeaways. You don't have to agree with them. Then we'll just spend a couple of minutes on each state, what we think the results look like. And finally, Neelan and I'll have some conversation on those 4 or 5 factors which we think drive voting choices in India. We also hope this conversation to be much more in a discussion format, since previous such conversations, at the end, we are left with very few minutes to take questions from you all. So we'll keep it much more conversational. Friends who are on Zoom, please feel free to send your questions on Q&A box, and they'll reach to me via Prakriti. So Prakriti, can I start? Everything okay. So for me, the big takeaway message after the results yesterday is that we don't have anything interesting on the slide, so you can keep looking in front, which is that the road to 2024 just became much more difficult for Congress. In 2018, Congress has won these 3 heartland states, Chhattisgarh, Rajasthan, and Madhya Pradesh. But in 2019 elections, they were not able to repeat that performance. Now, when they have lost these elections, it just makes their challenge to BJP in 2024 more difficult. I also think now that the future of opposition alliance has become much more certain. Of course, Congress president has called a meeting of allies on 6th. I'm not sure whether that meeting will take place or not, because there's a lot of public posturing that is taking place. And even if some kind of alliance gets stitched up in the run-up to 2024, some of the parties are going to extract their pound of flesh. Third, I do think that now it's not just BJP won in these 3 states. They won convincingly. And it somehow, in some ways, indicate their dominance in the Hindi belt. And I'm open to sort of like questions or conversations on that. I don't want to pretend, and I'm not sure, I won't use the word pretension, but you might have answers to what happened. I don't think I have a clear answer to what happened yesterday. Because in the run-up to this election, and especially because exit polls this time were all over the place, in most cases, even if exit polls don't manage to predict the magnitude of victory of a political party, directionally, they were used to be in one direction. This time, even the top 3 or 4 pollsters who are much more regarded, they were predicting each state very differently. So this cycle, I don't think any pollster can claim that they got more than 2 states right. So it was very, very sort of chaotic, and that's why...
And all of them seem to have gotten one of the states.
Yes, once. And the one state everyone got right. Telangana, which is closest in vote share. Normally, you would expect that the closest in vote share is going to be harder to predict, but it happened other way. So less than 24 hours, I don't have an explanation for what happened. All I can say that there are array of complex factors that led to these victories for BJP in 3 states, Congress in Telangana and Mizoram, JPM in Mizoram, and I'm happy to go over some of those things. To me, what seems to be happening with the Congress party, and that's again just my reading, Congress basically overreads its victories and underplays its sort of defeats. And they win some place and they basically think that the reasons of victory can be easily extrapolated. And I'll talk about during Q&A, I'm happy to answer why I think so. Finally, and this is just from me, a note of caution, because I saw yesterday, in last 24 hours, both Congress official PR managers and unofficial PR managers trying to create a ideological binary between North and South. And to me, given where the politics is heading or the structural factors that are shaping Indian politics at the moment, this is going to prove very, very detrimental to Congress's own future. So it's just a note of caution. Of course, they can ignore, but at their own peril. Okay, so what I'm going to do, and Neelan, please feel free to sort of intervene in at every state, but I'm just going to walk you through the results. And now if you want to look at the map, please feel free to turn your head around. And the reason I just have maps of all these states to give you one interesting pattern that seemed to have emerged this time, which is in all states, we are also seeing some new regional elements sort of shaping up the verdict. So if you look at Mizoram, and I've arranged the states in terms of number of seats they have in the assembly. So there is no particular order. Mizoram, because it just has 40 assembly constituencies, I'll go first, and then Madhya Pradesh, which has 230 at the last. So Mizoram, what happens is that JPM, which is Zoram People's Movement, is an alliance of 6 sort of Mizo parties, which has just won the election. They got 30 seats out of 40, or heading to get 30 seats out of 40. This alliance was actually formed last time in 2018 election, but because the formation happened very, very close to the election, they did not get a single symbol. And so all of them actually contested as independents. And so many people might be thinking, where did this party suddenly came? Because they didn't have any vote share. The reason they didn't have a combined vote share, because they all contested as independents. But if you put the candidates, JPM actually had somewhere roughly around 25% vote share even in the last election. Now they have got 38%, but there was a history to this. And many of the constituents of Mizoram, JPM, are actually old political parties of Mizoram. So Mizo People's Party, Zoram Nationalist Party, Mizo People's Conference, some of these parties are 3 to 4 decades old. What happens in Northeast, and some of my colleagues might be able to add to this, is that there is a lot of churning of state-level parties in the Northeastern states. They are there for 10, 20 years, and then they suddenly decline, and they take another shape. So what seems to be happening with the rise of JPM is basically coalition of these old parties coming together. And JPM basically has swept the elections in terms of seats, right? And you look at the map, basically everything in and around Aswal is one color. So green is what is JPM strongholds, or where JPM is leading or won. And blue is where MNF, Mizo Nationalist Front, is holding on to its base. Light blue is Congress, which just got 1 seat. Last time it was a party number 2, and now it has been delegated to party number 4. BJP has won 2 seats. So BJP has now become party number 3 in Mizoram. Their vote share are still low compared to Congress, but they've got more seats. Of course, there are complex set of factors, and I don't have an explanation for what happened in Mizoram. So first, from the survey data, what it seems that Ladu Phoma, who is the leader of JPM, has suddenly become extremely popular. He's an ex-IPS officer, part of Indira Gandhi's security details in 1980s. He becomes an MP of Congress Party in 1984. And then early this decade, he actually moves out of the Congress Party. And in the survey data, he's actually twice as popular as the incumbent Chief Minister Zoramthanga, who is leader of MNF. Now, how did suddenly Ladu Homa became so popular? I don't have an explanation. A lot of people from Mizoram or journalists who work on that are saying that there were charges of massive corruption. So some people have actually written, this is Mizoram's AAP movement. And Ladu Homa is risen like Arvind Kejriwal in Delhi. So that's one explanation. And especially even in the micro details of the survey data, it's the younger voters, 18 to 30 years of age, and those who have class 12 pass or undergraduate degrees, where the gap between ZPM and MNF is high. So it seems that the younger educated crowd basically holds MNF and Congress duality as responsible for their plight. And so there's some kind of anti-corruption, anti-establishment sentiment, which is what Ladu Homa played on. And he rallied all this segment. Now, did Manipur had a shadow? Because these two are neighboring states. Lots of people actually argue or are going to argue that Manipur actually played a role in what happened in Mizoram. I'm not so sure. The reason is twofold. One, MNF actually in the run-up to campaign, while being part of the National Democratic Alliance, distanced itself from the BJP. And they said, we are part of BJP, we are part of the alliance, but BJP is going to contest independently and we are going to contest independently. And the second, if Manipur crisis was doing all the work in Mizo politics at this moment of time, we should have seen Congress gaining some votes. In fact, Congress has lost 10 percentage point, which means that something else is at work in Mizoram, and those who have studied Northeast politics would be able to explain this better. Okay, moving on to the next state, Chhattisgarh. So Chhattisgarh, and Neelan, please feel free to add to all these states now that are coming in, is Chhattisgarh had historically, since its formation, very, very close elections. So in 2003, 8 and 13, the margin of victory between Congress and BJP was around 1.5 percentage points. So BJP used to win those elections just by 1 or 2 percentage points and used to have, so it's a 90-member assembly. BJP got, I think, 46, 48, and 49 seats in this order. So very close elections. In 2018, Congress actually wins massive in Chhattisgarh. And I think this massive victory became one of the reasons that everyone thought, and even the pollsters, that given this gap, BJP will not be able to fill this gap. Raman Singh, the chief minister, is now too old and too uncharismatic to be able to swing 8 to 10 percentage point gap which exists between the two parties. And in the survey data, sitting chief minister Bhupesh Baghel seems very much popular, right? Like he's popular as a CM, he's very, very popular. But some of the journalists who had traveled the state had pointed out that there is a lot of local level anti-incumbency against the MLAs. So Congress has 63 or 68 MLAs in the House of 90. And there were a lot of local level anti-incumbency. Now, I don't know the reason why local anti-incumbency developed, but that's the report that we got. And so BJP now in this election actually wins its highest vote share and highest seat tally since the creation of the state in 2000. So state where it was expected that Congress, even if it loses, it will lose some seats and votes, but still will be able to come back to par. BJP just lost it. And I'm telling you, even till 10 a.m., BJP yesterday thought that Chhattisgarh is gone. Yeah. Right? And so I don't think BJP had a good grasp on that they can win the state.
I mean, Chhattisgarh is a state that you should just never believe the polls. Remember, last time nobody saw Congress.
Yes.
They said BJP will win again and Congress swept. And this time they said Congress will win again and BJP swept. So then I think at this point you should just disregard any.
And so there are going to be lots of narratives that are coming out why Congress lost Chhattisgarh. Some say that Baghel runs a very, very sort of like autocratic style leadership. I don't know whether that makes such a difference to things. Because most leaders in India have that tendency. So I don't know whether that can alone explain things. Some are basically saying Baghel didn't complete the promises that he had made in the run-up to 2018 elections. So people are citing the PISA Act unfulfillment and many of those things. What has happened, like if you look at the map, now the bottom part of Chhattisgarh is actually the Bastar Sarguja region, which at those 20 seats went to polls earlier, right, on November 7th. And in these seats, BJP never does well, right? It's the first time that in the Bastar district, like where there are 12 seats, BJP actually wins 9. And I think that gave BJP some hope because they must have got some ground reports that we are going to do better than everyone was expecting. They put a lot of energy into the campaign between 7th and 17th. And what they were at best hoping that we are going to make a contest out of this election. I don't think they are good. They are basically thinking that we'll overturn the results in our favor in such a big way. What the, like again, as Neelan pointed out, because everyone was thinking in exit poll surveys that Congress will have an advantage. I can't take the micro data at face value, but in that data, what we see that BJP makes a serious gains among STs and among OBCs, and especially the Kurmis. So Bhupesh Baghel is a Kurmi, and the Sahus. Those are two very large OBC communities in Chhattisgarh, which has rallied behind the BJP. Second thing is, which is hard to sort of like, find evidence for. So there has been an infighting in Chhattisgarh Congress between Bhupesh Baghel and T.S. Singh-Dev. Both of these leaders were promised after 2018 elections that each of one of you will get shot at the chief ministership. They've never got the chance. And so there are now rumors that T.S. Dev sabotaged the election. These are now just rumors and speculations. Who knows what went there? You want to add anything to Chhattisgarh?
No, I was going to add exactly the factionalism point, but you just added.
Okay.
So
stop me whenever you think.
I'll stop.
Okay. Next state, Telangana, 119 seats here. And again, I think this is the state which most exit polls got right. And at the end, the difference in vote share between Telangana, between BRS, which is Bharatiya Rashtriya Samiti, and Congress is just 2 percentage points. So closest in terms of vote share. And if you look at Telangana map, the bottom districts are actually districts closer to Andhra Pradesh, right? They border Andhra Pradesh. So if you draw a line, you have like those small sort of like circles in the middle, which is what is the Hyderabad district. So if you draw a straight line passing through it, you will recognize that there is a regional pattern that is emerging out from Telangana. Basically, the eastern Telangana or the borders on the side, districts on the side of Andhra Pradesh overwhelmingly voted for Congress, and the districts which are on the side of Maharashtra and other neighboring states, there on the top, BJP did really, really well, picked up some seats. They picked up some seats in Hyderabad, but BRS also did well in those. So a regional pattern emerged, and I think one of the reasons Congress managed to do well in Telangana is that it's understood both its strengths and weaknesses. I'll tell you how I think what happened in Telangana. So TRS actually is it encashed the Telangana movement sentiment in 2014 election, 2018 election. So you can't keep encashing the same sentiment every election. They needed something else. I don't think they worked on that. Second, Congress had actually made a mistake in the last election, 2018. They had contested that election with the Telugu Desam party. And so that's why Congress got thrashed in the 2018 election, because Telugu Desam party is seen as a party of united Andhra, right? So the combined vote share of Congress and TDP and smaller parties were 32, 33% from where they could actually build onto this campaign. So this time what happens? Congress is contesting alone. Second, TRS makes certain mistakes. Of course, corruption and those kind of things are part of every politics, so I don't go into that. But TRS, I think, imagined that from Hyderabad, it could fund a campaign for national politics. So it itself re-christianed at no longer TRS, but Bharatiya Rashtriya Samiti, which gave one opening to the young fiery leader, Revantha Reddy, that now these guys are betraying the Telangana movement, right? So he doubled down on his campaign and attacked and everything. And even BJP made certain mistakes. BJP, which had done well in 2019 elections, won 4 seats in the northern part of Telangana, where they are picking up those seats. Also sort of like made some mistakes that in the last, so they had done well in the Hyderabad municipal elections and they had high hopes. But after that, they suddenly changed their state level leadership twice or thrice, which I think confused what their strategy is going to be, whether it's focusing on OBC mobilization or upper caste mobilization. And Congress basically sort of like took advantage of some of the mistakes that opposition was making. It created a positive momentum after Karnataka victory and Bharat Jodo Yatra, which spent significant amount of time in the southern states. But also that Congress actually doesn't do really well, or actually does very badly in the greater Hyderabad region. And so they forgot, I think, those 30 seats and focused their campaign on the 90 other seats. And that's why, because they know that in the greater Hyderabad region, BRS and MIM, which is a party headed by OSC, has a tactical understanding, and Congress will not be able to get votes from Muslim communities. And so the campaign then focused much more on the southern and central districts, and we have that result in front of us because of like understanding the strength and weaknesses much better.
So I think the only other thing that I'd add is that one of the narratives that we have from the state and the reason for the anti-incumbency is extraordinary biases in distribution. So the TRS re-christened as BRS is associated with large welfare programs, cash transfers. And one of the things that we typically associate with these kinds of welfares is fairly universalistic distribution. 2 programs in particular, Raitu Bandhu, which is a farmer's program, Dalit Bandhu, which is to Dalits, were seen as being captured by elite interests, perhaps with partisan biases as well. That's very unusual given the kind of technology that we have for the distribution of these benefits, right? So one of the big questions going forward will be, why did that happen, or why did that, how is that perception created? Because even when people are not supportive of the government, you don't hear about this kind of extraordinary claim of bias. That also led to a lot of anti-incumbency against a lot of the MLAs, and I think against better advice, BRS chose to run many of these very unpopular MLAs. So that's definitely one part of the story, and I think one part that needs to be figured out. The BRS itself may not know exactly why that kind of bias came to be, but it's there. I think when they sort of look back at it, trying to understand, it's the only state, I mean, before we sort of look at any of the other states, right? I mean, we would have associated Telangana as another state that maybe looks like a West Bengal or an Andhra Pradesh or an Orissa, where these sort of massive welfare schemes, almost an combination. This is the one state in which we're not seeing that kind of phenomenon, and trying to unravel why at least there are these kinds of claims of biases in economic distribution is going to be a large part of the story, I think, going forward.
Okay, moving on to the next state, Rajasthan. So, everyone knows this history of Rajasthan for last 30 odd years, since 1993. No incumbent government has ever been repeated. So it has this revolving door kind of politics where Congress wins, BJP comes, BJP wins, Congress comes to power. there was an expectation in the run-up to this election that BJP may have some advantages, but Ashok Gehlot government has tried to unfurl a lot of welfare schemes in the run-up to 2023 polls, and he'll be trying to reverse sort of like this historical trend. What doesn't get talked a lot is that Congress in some ways also have a geographical and a social based disadvantage in state of Rajasthan. And the reason why I say this is that if you look at the electoral data of last 25 years, when BJP wins, they win big, both in terms of vote share, but they will touch 120, 130, 150 seat share mark out of 200. But when Congress wins, it barely manages to cross the majority mark, right? Even in last election, they only got 96 out of 200. And so in that sense, the first point is that they have some sort of like social-based disadvantage. BJP draws from a larger pool. Second, if you look at the assembly constituency level data from 2008, Congress actually has not won 54 seats in 2008, 13, and 18. Meaning that if they want to cross the 100-seat mark in 2023, they needed to convert 100 seats out of 150. So they have a much higher odds to be able to reach that 100-seat mark in comparison to BJP, because Congress has such seats, I think 9 or 8. So very, very sort of like difficult for Congress to, one, go against this historical trend, but also be able to overcome these odds. Neelan, since he and Yamini traveled in Rajasthan, they can talk much more about what's happening on the ground. But one picture from the graph that I can basically tell you, actually the region between the two dark blue areas is where the Congress used to have. In fact, in last election, they dominated that region. And that's what is known as the Gujjar belt of Rajasthan. And since there have been some factional fighting, Sachin Pilot rebelled, of course, there was an attempt to bring these two leaders together. It didn't seem to have worked. And so from the survey data, again, because exit polls were not right on Rajasthan, what we saw that basically the gains that BJP made was very, very high in 2 or 3 communities. One is Gujars, second is the STs, and third, I think, not Meenas, but Jats a little bit. So basically these, and the Rajputs. So those 2-3 communities basically got. So this Gujjar belt, where Congress should have done well, but perhaps because of the infighting, BJP gets a large number of seats from that region. And then in the southern, they always had that advantage where they have completely sort of like.
So I think I'll reserve some comments for later because I traveled a bit in Rajasthan, but I mean, you've hit kind of the main points, right? I mean, I think.
Okay. Moving on to Madhya Pradesh, which is the largest state in this round of assembly elections. It has 230 seats. So the question for me, like in the run-up to polls, and I wrote something on this, is whether Madhya Pradesh is a bipolar elections where 2 parties compete, or Madhya Pradesh has become a dominant party state. And the reason I asked that question is because for last of 20 years, BJP has been in power for 18 years, right? Congress last time came to power, but lost because of Scindia's rebellion after 15 months. But even in that election, where there was so much sort of like dissatisfaction with the BJP's performance, and there were issues on SC/ST Act, some upper caste resentment, everything, BJP still managed to get more votes than the Congress, right? So in the worst election, if they are still being able to get better of you in terms of vote share, Congress would need, to me, an extraordinary election to defeat BJP in Madhya Pradesh. And that became much sort of like, so when I was looking at the AC level data, BJP actually has not lost 75 seats from 2008 to 2018, meaning 75 out of 230 is that almost 1/3 of the state has been with them for last 15 years. So while in the run-up to campaign, and this is why we had that conversation on election Hawa last week, because I also went to Madhya Pradesh and everyone was using this word that there is a fatigue with BJP and there's a fatigue with Shivraj Singh government and everything. And I thought like fatigue is not a political science term. I have not seen this in the voting behavior models. How do we understand what fatigue actually means? Right. And so that we had that conversation and hopefully that leads us to somewhere. So everyone basically was not betting. Everyone was saying this is going to be closed. Last time you had like the counting went on till midnight. Same thing can happen even in this time. So most pollsters actually predicted very close election in Madhya Pradesh, except Axis, which said BJP is going to cross 150, 160 mark. And that's what actually happened in Madhya Pradesh. Madhya Pradesh, BJP actually got its highest ever vote share, more than what it had got in 2013 election. So it basically touched 48% vote share mark. What is happening in all three states? Congress is largely holding on to its vote share base of 2018. But BJP has basically increased its vote share in comparison to 2018. So in all those states, the smaller and sort of like parties like BSP or SP or independents basically get squeezed in this competition between BJP and Congress, and everyone gravitates towards, or a large part gravitated towards BJP. This is something also happened in UP in 2022, right? Samajwadi Party increases its vote share, but seat tally conversion is not happening because BJP votes basically increase, right? And BSP got sort of like squeezed and Congress got squeezed despite running a very formidable campaign. So now with this kind of like 160, 165 out seats, there's no point. Like we tried to do some things, but everything was in one direction. Right? But and some of the questions I leave for sort of like Neelan to weigh in. One is like if you look at the topmost part, which is also known as the Gwalior Chambal belt, Congress did phenomenally well in that region last time. But now it has turned saffron. Perhaps one reason is that Scindia, who comes from that region, had walked with 20 odd MLAs and joined BJP. So there were sort of like things that there is now factional in fighting at the local level within the BJP, who gets ticket, who doesn't get ticket, and this will become a bad sort of like region for BJP. In fact, with Scindia around, they sort of like turn the tables on Congress. Second, what seems to be happening from Axis data is that I think Congress's attempt to make this sort of like a leader contest between Kamal Nath as sort of like face of the campaign didn't help them much, because Kamal Nath, while he has been around in politics for 50 years, for longest serving parliamentarian, he's not considered as a mass leader, right? He's not as so like there's no connect with masses. He's of course holds on to Chhindwara. He's a formidable organizer and perhaps a fundraiser, but not a person with whom a large section of population would attract. And so in all these cases, especially in Madhya Pradesh, there is that Ladli Behna scheme, which is basically giving out 1,250 rupees to women in Madhya Pradesh. People are talking that this worked in favor of Shivraj Singh Chauhan. I would say, yes, it was one factor. It couldn't have actually explained the scale of victory, right? And so BJP definitely has an advantage in terms of female voters in Madhya Pradesh. Then the question actually becomes, why could Congress not rally women voters in Rajasthan and Chhattisgarh, where they had similar sort of schemes? Do you want to add certain things on this, and then we'll do something else? Both you and Yamini, since.
No, I mean, look, nothing to add such as Madhya Pradesh. I'll
okay.
research.
Okay, so just to conclude here in terms of like, this is not a theory of Indian vote, but to me, basically, a combination of these 5 factors drive election outcome. And unless we think on all these 5 factors, the sort of everyday conversation then revolves around people picking and choosing which one thing they liked and trying to explain election outcomes. I think elections have to be understood on all these five things, and this is where parties make mistakes or parties do well. In some cases, there are sort of like structural reasons, such as social base, right? For BJP, Karnataka is always going to be a difficult state. They sometimes are going to win, sometimes lose, but they will never get two-thirds majority in Karnataka in near future. The reason is that in Karnataka, BJP, at least in one large pocket, which is southern Karnataka, south of Bangalore, doesn't have presence, right? So they are structurally weak in some regions. Similarly, these kind of structural weaknesses show for Congress in some of the Hindi states because they have not been winning certain regions very, very. Second, and this is where I think Congress over-extrapolated its victory in Karnataka. In Karnataka, they had a formidable social base. They had at least equal organizational machinery, if not better than the BJP. In the heartland states, that's not the case. Like some of these are historically, or at least Madhya Pradesh for sure, has a much better organizational machinery. Think of it. If you are out of power for 20 years, your organization can't be as strong as BJP, right? So for those kind of reasons, organizational machinery, and organizational machinery, I'm not just thinking in terms of boots on the ground, but also resources. You need money to contest election, right? Like because Congress had few states, Chhattisgarh also paid or the Congress government in Chhattisgarh paid one kind of price. I don't know whether this can be said here or not. But if you have only few states in your hand, how are you financing elections in other states? So there comes the burden of basically one or two states that you are in hand, right? And that creates lots of pressures on. So money matters in elections, and BJP in some of these states have much more resources to mobilize. Third, it's always going to be also on performance. I don't think you do really badly either as an opposition party or as a government and you can hope to win. In Karnataka, BJP was rated negatively, right? Like even BJP workers and leaders complaining that this is a very, very corrupt government. Now, you don't have that same thing with Shivraj Singh Chauhan, right? You could say that we are bored with Shivraj Singh Chauhan, but no one sort of like disliked him, right? So you had a very different kind of campaign that needed to be built, and performance and welfare and delivery will become part of the third thing that I want to look. Fourth, elections are always in some ways going to be about the narratives that get created during the campaign, what kind of machinery and messages mobilized. Is there a core ideological voter who can be mobilized on the ground? So that also matters. And finally, all of this ties on the leadership thing as well, because ultimately the message have to be delivered through some kind of popular frames, and leadership becomes important. And so in Karnataka, like Siddaramaiah and DK Shivakumar combination is much more formidable than a Bombay sort of a face, right? And you had already relegated your sort of popular leader to the background. So to my mind, Congress overread extrapolation of Karnataka model into Hindi heartland without understanding the structural weaknesses and all those kind of things. And perhaps in Telangana, they were much more prepared to understand those weaknesses and strength they have. So with that, let me ask Neelan to open up the conversation, tell us something about what he thinks on what drives Indian elections and what happened in 2023, and then we'll have a conversation.
I think I'll just take about 5 minutes. I don't have the sort of encyclopedic knowledge that Rahul does of every state and every social base in every region. So I was like, you talk about that. What I wanted to do was to think a little bit about some general trends that we are seeing and that we're thinking about in the Indian electorate, and how that might play out in 2024. What are some sort of generalizable claims that we might be able to make? So I want to take as a starting point, and I think something that has impacted a lot of how the playbook, as it were, is constructed as how you try to defeat the BJP. I want to think about 2021 West Bengal and the most recent Karnataka elections, because in some sense, the story that was coming out is that you have to be a welfarist, right? You have to be able to give fairly universalistic benefits, you have to be able to defeat the BJP on issues of gender, right? So almost all of these states, it's a copycat model. They have a very similar structure, right? So you have defined a certain category of recipients. Within the state, you define the head of household as the female spouse. Now, it's important it's female spouse because you are broadly entitled to benefits once you are married and or have children, right? For in most of these cases. And that's also true of Ladli Behna, for instance, in Madhya Pradesh. Once that is the case, then whatever cash transfer is being delineated for the household is being transferred into the woman's bank account, right? That is the standard model that is now being used in a lot of states, right? And the welfares, as it were, Mamata Banerjee, Jagan in Andhra Pradesh, KCR in Telangana, and now Siddaramaiah in Karnataka, are seen as people who lean very heavily on a certain kind of welfares. But I think the part of the story that people don't talk enough about is the extent to which a certain amount of branding is going into who is delivering the benefits, the extent to which it's not just the fact that the benefit is being given, but the fact that it's being given by Siddaramaiah or the fact that it's being given by Mamata Banerjee. And the reason why that matters is that, at least within the electorate, the idea that a politician can credibly commit to giving transfers or benefits in a particular way or to a certain subset of the population is a very important part of how this goes. So one of the stories that we heard in Chhattisgarh is that the BJP essentially had a copycat manifesto of the Congress party. And what that did is that there was no obvious reason why the Congress would be better at implementing its manifesto than the BJP would. Right? There is no obvious reason why I should have trusted Bhupesh Baghel over Raman Singh or whoever the BJP made. That is one of the arguments that we often heard on the ground. And so I think to understand what credible commitment means to the voter in terms of developing social bases is one part of the story that's missing. And I want to think a little bit about what this is meant in terms of louder. What this means in terms of the women's vote, right? I have heard, and Rahul also discussed, that one of the biggest phenomena that we see in the Hindi belt is an increasing gender gap where women are voting for the BJP to a greater extent than men. And this isn't just a question of having made or implemented this sort of structure of, making women the head of the household, but in fact, there has been a long-term investment by the BJP towards women voters. So Anirban Chaudhary, who's a political scientist, for instance, has been studying this, and he has made the argument that one of the things that the BJP party activists did was they recruited women to enter into party service through service or seva. It's a very similar story that has discussed by Tariq Tachil vis-a-vis the tribal community and how the BJP has built its base among the tribal communities in the Hindi belt. And so the point here is that it isn't just a simple question of the delivery of benefits, but the credible commitment part of it is a large part of the story. And if credible commitment is a large part of the story, there's no reason why all of a sudden the Congress party or any new party deciding to change their delivery model in this cycle of elections will have that kind of dramatic effect on the social basis of the electorate. So beyond the sort of big picture stuff about branding, centralization, gender, I want to talk about some very specific issues that we saw in the Hindi belt. So The one obvious thing that has plagued the Congress party is factionalism. In each of the three states that we think of, Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, we can actually name at least two key factions that don't like each other, right? And that, may or may not have worked against each other's purposes. This is particularly noticeable, for instance, in a state like Rajasthan. Yamini and I traveled together in Rajasthan. The idea that there was a significant amount of anger among the Gujjar community against the Congress party because of the situation of Sachin Pilot was very clear. The Congress leaders themselves would have told you that they were not going to do very well among the Gujjar community this time. So the inability of the Congress party to manage the kind of factionalism that it sees on the ground and to put together sort of a consolidated campaign has been an issue. The BJP, on the other hand, and something that has been a characteristic of Modi and Amit Shah, is to centralize power all the way at the top, right? It's something that we all know. But the other part of it is that it has been to diminish any political leader that had standing pre-2014. So we saw a very, very explicit attempt to cast aside Vasundhara Raje in Rajasthan, Shivraj Singh Chauhan in Madhya Pradesh, although he seems to have made a comeback, and Raman Singh somewhat earlier, right? I mean, didn't need to do as much this time. And so a large part of this election is being run on Modi's name. And, despite us trying to give credit to some of the local actors, you do hear Modi a lot. In the survey data, you do see Modi a lot. To give an example, we've been running a survey, and there's a question that I ask in a number of states, which is, who do you hold responsible the most for delivering benefits to people like you? In South India, you will find less than 5% say the Prime Minister. In Madhya Pradesh, where I had access to a post-poll survey, that number is around a quarter of respondents, right? So it's much higher. And so there is definitely a certain pull that comes from seeing the Prime Minister, who is particularly popular in the Hindi belt, as a welfarist who can deliver, right? And that is part of the reason why perhaps we are seeing the kind of gender differentiation in the Hindi belt, in particular, women voters vis-a-vis male voters. So in the Access data, as well as the data that I have, the splits are almost the same, which is that men in the state of Madhya Pradesh almost voted for Congress and BJP in equal percentage, 1 or 2 percentage points this way or that. There's about a 10 percentage point gap among women supporting the BJP over Congress. Okay, final points. I think when we look back at this, I think Chhattisgarh is a good example of this. Congress needs to have a reimagination of how it thinks about caste and caste identity. I think there's been a lot of discussion of the caste census in Delhi. I don't think we ever heard a single person mention the caste census when we were in Rajasthan, right? I mean, it's a non-issue, and it is absolutely unclear to me how the Congress party thinks it will manage the contradictions that come from strengthening certain parts of the OBC community, weakening other parts with its Dalit voter base, tribal voter base, right? So there are many, many complicated questions for the Congress party. Does not look like they have thought through how to answer them. And the final thing here is that looking ahead to 2024, if we take the three Hindi belt states that we saw, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, and Chhattisgarh, in 2014 and 2019, the BJP won 62 out of 65 of the seats, right? So these are 95% plus strike rates. So the reason why these state elections don't tell you much about the national election is that nothing will ever predict 100% or 95% strike rate, right? You can lose all the elections as they did in 2018. You can do much better in 2013. But we do sense that the Congress is a divided house. It may not put up a fight in the way that the BJP we knew would continue to put up a fight in the Hindi belt because they have a strong social base. And at a minimum, the BJP can have confidence that perhaps its Hindi belt support heading into 2024 is as intact as it has been in the past. Just one liner here and open up to questions, which is that the Hindi belt, the BJP has contested approximately 180 to 200 seats in the last two national elections and has had a 90% strike rate. In fact, most of the seats that they've lost have been in UP and Bihar, but even then they've had very, very good strike rates.
So we are talking about a situation in which if the BJP has the kind of popularity that we tend to think has driven the 2023 results, the BJP starts with 170 or 180 seats just out of the Hindi belt before it even hits, before it needs to hit 272 to get a majority in Lok Sabha. So part of the reason when we think about what is the map for BJP to get to its 300 seats again, a lot of it is predicated on sweeping the Hindi belt as it has in the last two elections. Nothing we see here suggests that the BJP won't be able to again. And a lot of that hangs on whether almost all of these fights are Congress versus BJP fights. A lot of this hangs on whether the Congress can put up a stronger fight in 2024.
Yeah, in fact, now the vote share increase, the earlier probability of BJP ending up 250 is now lower. They may even touch the same mark or even cross some of that has increased. Even with the kind of majorities they have got in 3 states, there is a serious conversation on leadership change. So we might see 5 new faces as chief ministers. Of course, in JPM, in Mizoram and Telangana, that's expected. But BJP, despite having these formidable faces as Shivraj, Vasundhara, and Raman Singh, you might actually see new faces taking change of guard in 3 states.
I mean, one of the things just fascinating, if you travel in Rajasthan, the party machinery was actively attacking Vasundhara. So probably the most awful things you heard about her were coming from people who were sitting in a BJP office. So that has sort of set the scene for perhaps changing.
Okay, so let's, I'll just request my friends on Zoom to send questions on Q&A box, and my colleague Prakriti will send it to me, but some questions in the room, and then I'll bring things to you. Gurkirat, can you help with passing the mics around? Okay.
Thanks. I'm just going to throw in a few provocations because we've been having these conversations, and I was keen that you guys talk about some of this as well, just because it adds a further, a deeper flavor to all that you've spoken about and what we've learned from you. So I think 2 things, like a lot of the conversation, and I mean, Rahul, you have been positing this theory about BJP dominant kind of a framework. And what seems to be happening very clearly is that the entire political structure now is very much playing within contours that have been shaped by the BJP. And that leads me to think that the viable alternative is, okay, so let's cut back to 1999 through 2004 when we had the first full Vajpayee government, right? It was a Vajpayee government that was operating within norms that was set of a previous era of politics and a previous era of government. And in fact, it got upturned very quickly. In 5 years, it got upturned, and it only re-enters and then begins to dominate later when it very clearly and distinctively in some active choices that it had already started making. But those active choices then become centered frontally with no holds bar. And over these last 10 years, a very different kind of political norm setting has appeared, right? And everything that, we've been talking so much about welfareism amongst ourselves, and so much of that is, the Congress that had a distinct identity of welfareism. In fact, Gehlot to me is really interesting. I followed Rajasthan for a long time, few decades. Actually, the social security architecture that he was building as somebody who studies welfare is a very unique and distinct, had a very unique and distinct rights identity. But what he was choosing to sell, which we saw consistently, was a BJP framework of how you brand yourself. Now, a lot of what we hear is, oh, that branding was too late, or you've come too late to the party. But actually, Gehlot's social security architecture has a history that dates back to Narega and so on and so forth. And he just, for whatever reason, the political play and the electoral play was to play on Modi stuff not on Gehlot stuff. So therefore, is it that the challenge of the opposition is not just all this organizational stuff that is very much there, but that it is doing what the BJP did in 2000. It's playing too much within the framework that has been set. It's too frightened to change that. It latched onto this DBT which everybody has latched onto in the hope that it will be exactly the same, but it isn't. So I just wanted you to push. I wanted to push that is the challenge to BJP dominance has to come from an alternative hegemonic dominance, and that should be centered in the discussion, because I think that we very often the public's discourse gets into organizational, not power hungry enough, disappears, but there is a very fundamental deeper issue there.
Yeah.
And related to that is what Neelan, you and I have been talking about too, which is just how political parties operate. If our politics now is pushing all political parties to operate in a very centralized, non-democratic way. Not that the Congress is democratic, but the Congress still has old players that have their own factions, and they are not able to control for whatever reason. And so the narrative setting and the ability to actually deal with the factionalism is really hard. And so there's no way of getting around that. So are we then condemning ourselves in Indian electoral politics to a political party structure that is fundamentally and foundationally undemocratic? Because for the moment, it appears that that's the only way in which political parties are being able to operate. And what does that mean in the longer term? Do you actually have successful democracies with such centralized political party cultures?
Oh, of course. Okay, viewers.
Okay, so
but Neelan, I have also got feedback that you start off really loudly and then you disappear into a whisper. So you have to stay very loud.
I'm speaking for the people in the room. So, okay. So okay, look, one of the things that you mentioned, I think very clearly, in terms of how both Kamal Nath and Gehlot actually sought to run their campaigns, they looked very BJP style. So much so that it is an open secret that the chief ministers were running a campaign unit that was separate from the Congress party, right? They hired their own consultants. They ran, and they were sometimes at loggerheads with what the party as a whole was trying to do. So the idea of personalized branding was fundamental, and advertising was fundamental to what they were trying to do. And a lot of this did show up just in the last few years. So I think that's very true. I think that the chief ministers, at least these two chief ministers, definitely were trying to play within that playbook. In terms of, so look, you know my view on this. I'm not sure everyone else knows your view on moving towards a system in which you are going to have hyper-centralization and very low intra-party democracy. Yes, right. I think it's actually started in the 1990s. It started with regional parties. The reason why Modi and Amit Shah are so good at it is that they started as regional actors as well. Control of, if we were talking about any random state in India in a regional party, total control of media, control of police, control of corporates is not an unusual thing to talk about, right? What has become unusual is that we now talk about is at the central, right? So that is tied to many other phenomena that we see, the extent to which candidates have to bring their own money to win elections, the extent to which local MLAs are uninvolved in policy decisions, right? There are a whole host of outcomes that come from this, but we are fundamentally coming into a polity, at least for the medium term, in which the democratic accountability linked to your local representative is extremely weak, right? The accountability link, insofar as there is one, is to the leader at the top. And the leader at the top is particularly engaged in burnishing that link, so he doesn't have to deal with any of the lower level actors, faction, so on and so forth. In some ways, this election is a very good example of that, right? Part of the reason why the BJP doesn't have the kinds of factions of the Congress is precisely because of the way that the National Party is going after its own chief ministers, right? And trying to centralize power to basically make sure that no single actor on the ground has enough power to create factions within the Hindi belt.
Okay. Yamini, to your question, short answer is yes. You can only sort of create a challenge to the BJP by thinking in the structural framework. What we don't do often is because structures put limitations on what actors can and can't do. And it limited BJP in the 1990s, what it could do. There is a reason why BJP in 1970s was talking about Gandhian socialism, because that was the nature of structural politics. Whether they actually followed or not, that's a different kind of thing. And that's why now you see every politician, be it Arvind Kejriwal or be it Bhupesh Baghel, they will peddle to some kind of Hindutva politics, because it's structurally now ideological median has moved in one direction. Whether it brings them vote or backfires them, but you have to play this politics to remain sort of relevant. Where do this challenge will come from and when? I don't have an answer to that. But what is the limitation of current politics is, just to use the military sort of like parallels. In military, you have that 3 levels, vision, strategy, and tactics. The entire conversation of how to challenge BJP, to me, is limited at the tactical level. Sometimes they move to the strategy level. But what the ideological vision of framework is going to be, I don't know. And it will take time, both in terms of figuring out, and second, in terms to be able to convince a mass of people that this is what we have to offer. Now, I don't want to basically take this idea that BJP succeeded today, so it's easier for other parties to do, because BJP didn't have certain historical baggage of being in power as Congress had, right? So the task for Congress is much harder, and it's sort of like, and so I sometimes, like, in these panel discussions, especially on TV, like they all start trying to blame Rahul Gandhi and like, you just changed leadership, right? Why has like even Congress has faction? It's basically now structurally Congress has become in a position that they now can't control factions, right? The BJP can basically crack the whip and control factions. Now, how do you control 2 factions when you don't have, like, it's a carrot and stick policy, right? If you don't have carrot and no one listens to your stick, then factions are going to be basically become an endemic problem. So I think that's the problem the opposition or Congress is facing. To your second question, I think Neelan answered it, but just to add it, yes, I agree with him. For foreseeable future, if I can use the term, political culture is going to remain under strain, and we are going to see rise of these kind of political parties and political players much more. While in our sort of like middle class drawing rooms, we tend to compare ourselves with or hope to become like US or UK and those kind of countries. Our trajectory now looks much more similar to Latin American countries, like you had similar kind of, not just inequality-wise, but you had similar kind of politics that was taking place. I don't remember the name of the author who pointed out, I think you guys should know, doing PhD, who used this term brown spots in Latin American politics, which is like, there are areas within, and very famous author, that there are areas within Latin America, regions, which look like brown spots because they are run by autocrats, those states. And so what we are seeing much more sort of like a similar political trajectory. And the economic implication of that is going to be that we'll be caught in a middle income trap.
Low income trap.
Yes, low income, yes. Low income,
We're still trying.
Yes. So let's take more questions and
yeah. So thank you. Rahul's last comment inspired a whole range of thoughts, but I'm going to keep my questions to what I was thinking before he said what he said, which is, really, we've spent like, Neelan, since the time you started the politics work at CPR, it's been like 10 years. Now we've had so many talks on, all of this stuff. And yet I feel that, really we are no better at sort of doing this as opposed to post facto analysis, in the sense that, I mean, Ashutosh Varshney posted about the surveys that were done by the various polling groups, both before and the exit polls, and the huge divergence that was there between some of them. And he was of the view that actually, if they are, what is wrong with the methodology? Because there shouldn't be so much divergence. That's one critique, that we are no better at figuring out what's going on. And I wanted to know why you think we are no better at figuring out really what's going on. How are things so off? I mean, there was a time when there was this joke that exit polls are always wrong. So whatever the exit polls say, now sometimes they get it right, but sometimes they get it completely wrong, and there's a wide divergence. So where are we at with that? And the second thing I want to ask is about, voting percentages. Because for the longest time, it was believed that when based on the data in the US and so on, is that if the voting percentage is high, then you're voting the incumbent out. But in India, there was a defiance of that, in the sense that if the voting percentages are high, then it could be pulling up. In this election, we have seen high voting percentages, which have both voted the incumbent out and have kept the incumbent. So is there any way of reading in the 5 states that went to polls how the voting percentages work? And do we have any insights for how that is working in multipolar? I mean, I can see a case wherein, if there's a multipolar contest and the voting percentage is high, how that plays out is very different from what it would in a bipolar contest. But are we any closer to drawing an inference from that to incumbency or anti-incumbency?
Couple of things. So, are we any better at pre as compared to post analysis? I mean, probably not, but I also don't think that the vast majority of people who are working on political behavior are particularly interested in predicting exactly what's going to happen in elections. I mean, I think if I take Ashu's comment, which is, the comment is actually in some ways a lot more specific, which is that you should not have this kind of variation. Let's assume for a second that it's only BJP and Congress. There's some bias. People who are voting for Congress won't always tell you. People who are always voting for BJP won't tell you. But we actually properly randomly sample the population. There's a certain amount of variation that you should get, even if the polls are biased, right? What we are seeing, the kind of variation that we're seeing, suggests that the sampling itself is all over the place, right? One of the things that, now we often talk about, sometimes Axis Poll gets it a little bit more correct than many of the others. One way to see it is that they're actually sampling very poorly as well, but at least they go to every seat and talk to a lot of people in those seats. So if it's not a close election at the seat level, they'll tend to get the seat prediction right, which tells you that probably a lot of what we're seeing is just very bad sampling. There are a couple of organizations we all trust. They do sample properly, but there are many that do not. In terms of, Rahul will perhaps have more to say about turnout. We don't tend to think that turnout has much of a relationship in India to whether you're voting out the incumbent or not. There are two countervailing forces. People might be angry with the incumbent and want to come out at a higher rate, but that is confounded with the fact that parties that are better at mobilizing will naturally create higher turnout rates, right? So one of the phenomena that we've seen in the Hindi belt is that the BJP is actually, particularly in national elections, much better at turning out its voters. And so when you've seen large increases in turnout in the Hindi belt in the national elections, it has tended to favor the BJP, even if it was already in power.
So, Neelam, stop me if I go on a rant on these two questions. The reason why I'm saying this, in social science research in India, we actually know very little on things, but we pretend that we know a lot, right? So the reason turnout, we have like almost zero good papers on turnout in India. And the reason is that because we are not even clear about what our denominator is, right? So in India, what is happening at the election commission level, electoral rolls are being cleaned very rapidly, right? And so I don't know whether the turnout increase is an effect of actually people turning out, or it is basically your denominator becoming much smaller. Right? So it's whether it's a statistical artifact or whether it's actually people, like the logic is people get angry, dissatisfied. That's why they get onto the road and vote out the incumbent. But if that's not the reason why you are seeing the turnout, higher turnout, then we don't know what the motivation is. Similarly, on the sort of like polling, in US where they get polls wrong, almost every political science department in that country will have at least a course on survey research, voting behavior, those kind of things. In India, I don't know any political science department that teaches these things. So people don't have even an iota of understanding how to consume information on like these surveys. And so we, pollsters, journalists, everyone think it's an election night, tamasha, ho gaya, chalo ghar chalte hain. Right? How do we improve polls without understanding how polls should be done in this country? Right? And that's why I don't even want to get into this debate of how much right or wrong we get. I am still happy to get access to some of this data. It gives me some inference of what's happening. Otherwise, how do I even study what's happening in Indian politics? So I would be even happy even if we manage to do our post-election analysis right. Forget about pre. The nature of prediction by itself is a sort of like a hard exercise. No one manages to predict future. Can we do sort of like weather forecast? Do we manage to make an economic and market forecast? No, by all those forecasts by nature are very, very tricky business. So election forecast is going to be same. I'm happy with that. I think for us, the problem is that we don't have quality data and enough scholars to be able to decode what happened after the election. Neelan and I are making things up. Sorry, Neelan, you might have theories, right? We're just saying things we think. Do we have evidence to be able to back all the claim? I don't know. These are some of the observations, some taking things from here, some taking things from there, but not a body of work on which we can basically
certainly
be
not the standards that
yeah.
we would like to.
Yeah, it would be better.
Now,
Yeah, no, sorry. So I said, I just wanted your views on this, which is that we have traditionally tended to see state elections, especially state elections, as an issue of, voting out incumbents if performance is poor. And if there's a distinct impression that performance has been better, then they get voted back, right? This has been our traditional sort of view of looking at how state elections pan out in India. Would you agree with that, by and large, traditionally?
Sure, that's a view.
Is this view hold? Why does it not hold in recent times?
But that view was never backed by any deep analysis.
Fair enough.
We don't know how to measure performance.
So either we can say we disagree with that view, or we can say, yes, it holds, but something has changed in recent times. So which one would you go with? If you are going to say, no, it doesn't hold, no more discussion, fine. Then we have to start looking for other ways to analyze why elections in the past behaved in particular ways, which seem to be consistent.
Performance was never the only criteria on which elections were won or lost.
No, it's never an only criteria. It is the predominant criteria, is what we tend to think. If we disagree with that, that's fine.
I disagree.
Okay. Neelan, what do you think?
Okay, so let's just go to the debate for a second, right? So one of the classic debates in political behavior all around the world is whether voters are retrospective or prospective, right? So retrospective means I look at how the incumbent has performed. If I like it, great. If I don't, no. Prospective is to say I look at all of the options in front of me and I am voting for the person who I think will do best in the future, right? And while it seems like that's like a simple flip, it turns out that often those two logics actually create very, very different outcomes. So back to Rahul's earlier comment, we have no idea whether voters are one or the other. There's at least been a lot of research in other countries. There's no common agreement, but there's a lot of research as to whether voters are A or B. But the other thing is to say, I think as a reasonably rational model, you can say voters will vote for the party that they think will do better. Okay, let's just sort of say, but so in some sense, the parameters are not to say, will I vote somebody back based on performance? It's to say, well, how am I actually measuring what performance is? Is it purely economic in nature? Is it jobs? Is it Ram Mandir? Is it right? I mean, so I think part of the challenge is that we have been, because voting behavior has not been a serious discipline here, we don't even have a great tapestry upon which to sort of judge the performance of an incumbent government, yet alone prospective choices.
Why I raised this question was the title. We are trying to see why people vote in particular ways. So my point is that if we say that in the past we looked at performance more and we've stopped looking at it so much and we are looking at the perspective more, then is this a shift which has taken place? Or no, there's no shift at all. I can't say the same thing for any of the elections in the past. It was always, looking at a mix, and performance had very little.
I think performance
as a predominant.
much more now than in comparison to past.
Oh, so you think Shivraj Singh was performing? I'm just trying to understand. Was the government in Uttarakhand with 3 changes of chief minister performing when it came back to power? I'm just asking. I leave it to you to answer.
Because voters now have access to more information, right? In the past, a large portion of voters had less information about what their government is doing or what they are supposed to do. So simply because of the information criteria, performance in the matrix of voting calculus will have a higher weightage. Whether like Shivraj performed or Kamal Nath performed, that's a separate question, because that's what I'm saying, that to me, it can't be just performance alone. And if voter information has increased, then certainly the social identity issues should decline a little bit more, because the campaign is also now going to be much more coordinated around national issues and state level issues and what the government is doing or not doing, just by that simple logic.
So what?
No, I think there are 2 or 3 things. I think one is that there is even when we were roaming around Rajasthan, there was no denial that Gehlot was not a performer. Everybody was visibly talking about his performance. Was that performance enough to tilt the edge? Is the question. So maybe another way of thinking about it is the critical question on which the voter is turning about your governance versus mine, or my willingness to appreciate the credibility of your promise versus the credibility of the other promise. And I think Neelan has made this point about the perceived credibility of the BJP, but particularly of the Prime Minister, built on all this Vishwas story that he has created, is so significant that from a voter's perspective, that credibility overrides a lot of things. And I think it's worth acknowledging, we don't have good data, so it's hard to say this with any certainty, but from conversations with people, when you go out in the field, the terms of the conversation have shifted a little bit. Like the one thing I remember when we were doing Narega social audits in Rajasthan, the Bicholia would always come up. That middleman who was consistently the present feature. DBT technology has eliminated that middleman. Does that mean corruption has come down or not? I have no way to answer that. But I can say with some degree of certainty from what I've heard that middleman doesn't exist anymore in the psyche of the person that you're speaking to when you talk to them about some of the scheme delivery. That is a shift. Now, does that shift lead you to a more efficiency, better performance? It's hard to say because we don't have any data, but that is shaping how the voter is thinking about it. And politically too, it's the most powerful tool. That's why all political parties are falling in love with DBT. It cuts out all the intermediaries. It allows you to say, Modi ne diya, Gehlot ne diya, Jagan ne. I mean, even it's gone to the point where in Andhra Pradesh, if Jagan could stamp his picture on the eggs that they are giving for midday meals, he will do it. Because it's all about building that version of Vishwas. So I think that the whole question of performance needs to be unpacked a little bit because of the nature of which political parties are now operating. Sorry.
So let's take some questions from the Zoom, whichever you want to answer. So you go ahead. I should give the mic to you. So I can read. So how much the Labharti factor matters. Similar question is whether Congress was not able to communicate their welfare schemes. So is it a communication problem in places like Rajasthan? Did you hear any narrative of rural distress, which was actually one talking point during the 2018 election campaign? Was that an issue this time? And especially after COVID and economic downturn, did any of these things become an issue?
Okay, so I think let me start with the second one first. I mean, building off what Yamini said, there was no personal anti-incumbency for Gehlot. I don't think anybody picked that up. It just was not even the data picks that up. Right? So people were by and large happy with his performance. I don't think that was an issue. I think part of the challenge, I mean, Yamini brought up, I've been talking about politics of Vishwas, but part of what is a confounding factor for trying to think about how the electorate is moving is that there are a significant number of people, and increasingly as politics becomes more centralized, more personalized, who have already made a decision about whom to vote for and are just finding a reason to vote for, right? And this is traditionally, it's a logic that is used for party politics outside of the Indian context, right? So it's to say that I already know I'm voting for the Democrats. I'll figure out why I'm voting for Biden, even if it's hard to find a reason, right? I will do it. Or I'm a Republican, I'll find a way to vote for Trump, right? This kind of thing, right? We do see that kind of voter, right? And so the question of how much we have of a Labharti voter is a tricky one because it is not obviously about just simply getting the benefit. It is about who is giving the benefit. Can I associate the person giving the benefit with my welfare? Is nobody else able to give that benefit just like you, right? So when Yamini was talking about Modi sort of seems to hit all of those checkmarks, right? That he's built a certain kind of credibility so that when I say, well, do you think, if we were just to ask, go anywhere in India and say, do you think Rahul Gandhi will be able to deliver to you in the way that Narendra Modi does? And how many voters do you think will say yes, right? That in some sense is the question, right, for a voter. Just final comment on this, and I'll turn to Rahul, is that this is, I think, hard for people to see in this context, but you should see it as very strange that I am voting for Congress or not voting for Congress based on whether I like Rahul Gandhi. This is actually a bit strange. Like, I am a Democrat or not a Democrat based on what I like about Biden, right? Right. So the sheer inability to associate anything of a party identity or an ideological identity as something independent from who might be the leader and whether you like the leader today is peculiar on one hand, right? But that is the question that you typically, right? That is typically the way in which the debate is being framed. And so that's part of, I think.
Can you answer two more questions? One is something on money and electoral bonds. Someone is asking whether electoral bonds actually just help the BJP to win elections. And second, the issue of caste census and whether it had any traction and what do we see the future of caste-based politics in India, whether BJP has ended that and those kind of things.
So caste census had no traction. Does caste politics exist in India? Yes. Has the BJP ended caste politics in India? Is that the question?
Yes.
No.
It has re-engineered caste politics.
It has re-engineered caste politics. I don't think so. Give you. I mean, like, let's say you go to Rajasthan, if you go to the Jat belt, it's not the case that like both parties aren't putting up Jat candidates, right? I mean, like it's still like a pretty salient feature of how you select candidates on the ground when one community is dominant versus another, right? So I'm not sure that's a weird. I don't know how to answer that. Yes, it's being redefined in various ways. Women voters matter much more than they used to. There are combinations of groups that previously were not possible, which are now possible with the BJP. But I don't.
Okay, let me try answering two other questions from here, and then we'll take a couple of questions in the room. One is basically asking about how did Congress lost seats if it managed to retain the same vote share in comparison to 2018? The answer is simple. The vote seat conversion depends on the spatial distribution of votes and how which other parties are getting votes in the system. The similar thing happened in UP 2022, that example I was using. In case of Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh, and Madhya Pradesh, the independent and others who used to get around 20% of vote share, that number came down. And a large portion of that coming down goes to basically went to BJP. It might have also got some to Congress, but because now BJP has more vote share than the Congress, its ability to convert seats will increase with every additional vote. So it's a simple mathematical sort of translation that's happening. Second, one question regarding why there were local level anti-incumbency against Congress MLAs. I don't think the answer is factionalism. Factionalism is part of the story. And I don't have an answer to why there were there local level anti-incumbency against BJP MLAs also? Yes. But how does BJP deals with it? It replaces them. There was a reason why 9 members of parliament and union ministers were asked to contest assembly level election. Congress was not able to replace many of the local level MLAs. And the reason is same. Once the party becomes weak, the centralized power structures can't dictate terms, right? And so you have to accommodate those factional interests. But if the party is centralized, then you can just crack the whip. And so while local level anti-incumbency, I would say, must have existed at similar level for BJP and Congress MLAs, BJP is what is known as Gujarat model, right? Of course, we think of Gujarat model in a different way. This is what PM Modi started since 2007. Almost half of Congress MLAs BJP MLAs were replaced and new faces were brought in. So just to basically get away from the local level anti-incumbency and get votes on the CM pop face. And this now, and the reason I yesterday also I tried not to talk about it because it will have perverse consequence for Indian democracy, that Congress should also do this. Because ultimately, if you are going to replace your local level MLAs, then the leadership will become much more stronger. And so what Neelan was talking about will be actually like a consequence. What we are already seeing, it's in motion. But if it happens at a larger scale, then centralization will basically also increase at a much faster pace.
I'm very thankful to you, like you are pointing out the social science education problem in India. So, no, so my question is like what sir told, that performance or creating a narrative of performance with the help of the resources or organizational machinery you are talking about. So that is the winning formula of winning an election, or it's just an performance. And how someone, sir, one more thing, like how someone is creating a better narrative than others, like it.
Politics is about perception. Always. Nowhere in the world, politics can be conducted just on the basis of performance. Politics at the end of the day is a performative art. So what you do matters less than how you communicate. There was a reason that in Germany and in many Western European democracies, you have propaganda secretary and official position in the party, right?
But like in MP, you're talking 20 years. The BJP is winning. So how they are creating such a narrative, then they are again and again winning the election, and Congress is not doing so better there. What is the problem?
Yeah, it's working. So I wanted to understand, like when you said that the Congress had retained its first share and BJP has increased, obviously there's squeezing of some political parties such as BSP, who was largely getting votes like from SCs, SC, STs, and then there's obviously some migration of women, correct? So first of all, my question was like, have women and men have started voting in within the same household, have started voting like in a different fashion? And what uh okay, but my point was like, despite that digital outreach might not be more to women, that might be more to men. So how this campaigning is going, which is like like reaching out to more. Yeah, so I don't think so. Like women have like independent phone as much as like as men would do. Like a lot of women might not have like a separate independent. Yeah, but if they're able to make these independent political choices, why doesn't it reflect in like other things? Like still, why is there like if you go to rural areas, the like I work in gender economics, so the concept of like women not able, like there's whole sense of agency building, capacity building, all these things are going on. But if they are able to make these independent political choices, why is it not getting translated into other aspects of life? Like let's say like I work in like this look, I'm telling you, like, so Sarpanch Pati is correct. This concept is pretty evident there. And
Panchayat series on Amazon. So, what did you see in that series? What did you see in that series?
yeah, like still like I don't know, like Neena Gupta was not able to make any independent decision.
In season 1, what happens in season 2?
Like I don't see her making any other decisions also, like in season 2. Like you can correct me if I'm going wrong somewhere.
Yeah, you should watch that series. This is what is also happening on the ground. Yes, this process starts with lot of men of the household calling shots. So you have either the brother or the father or the husband taking calling shots for that women leader who's getting elected. But by 4th or 5th year, you will see that these women start asserting themselves. I don't want to sort of like romanticize it. Power has its own nature, how it operates. People realize I have the power. Why shouldn't I do this? Give you a like not a bad. There's a paper by Francesca and a couple of her co-authors. And the study is very interesting. The study is this, that if you get a group of female and men politicians, inexperienced female politicians are less sort of dishonest. They're using coin toss experiment. But once you see female politicians becoming experienced, they become as dishonest as men are. Right? Now, simply I'm trying to say that once you start experiencing power, it also changes you in certain direction. Right? And so same is happening with female politician at the local level. In 20 years of this sort of like reservation system, which has been implemented on the ground, especially in places where women would have become second or third time sarpanch, you would see a very different characteristic, right? So, but we keep on hanging on the same concept that emerged 20 years ago. So this is why that rant on social sciences is that our conceptual categories are not moving while the politics beneath us has moved far. So we need much more innovation in social sciences rather than on the ground.
Just one more question. So I think there was a difference in like when you ask a woman, like they would opt for BJP than the Congress. So there's more shift or like caste-based shift of men towards Congress and caste-based shift of a woman towards BJP.
So for instance, there are certain splits. Favor the BJP, whereas there might have been a slight Congress bias among men, if I remember correctly, or whatever it is. It cuts across all communities. That was a noticeable thing in I think Access poll, even the poll that we were running. That was I mean, the other just one sort of other thing, which is that I think part of the challenge of studying any kind of shift of gender norms, especially in rural areas, is that certain things are much more sticky than others. Like for instance, marriage norms. Have not, I mean, like actually that might be one thing that is not really moving in the last 10, 15, 20 years. It's still very hard, right? Getting some kind of financial independence has moved big time, right? Partially because of the way the transfers are being done, right? So, I mean, I do think part of the challenge of characterizing where and how you are getting greater independence of women vis-a-vis men in the same household is actually very issue and implement specific. But there has been significant change.
I think we if we stop this idea that like in 20 years we should see a massive shift, then we'll be able to see what's happening. Slow and steady movement on all norms, right? In comparison to past, you've started seeing much more intercaste marriages. Now, to say that caste doesn't matter is one extreme of argument, right? But if intercaste marriages comparison 10, 15 years have changed, even by 2 percentage points, that basically shows some operation of agency on the ground, right? So that's what I was trying to say. Anyways, because we have already run out of time, so I would like to thank my friends who participated on Zoom. This, Neelan, was the 11th conversation in the series. Hopefully, we'll see everyone again in a week or two. But please do keep sending us suggestions or questions that you might have, and Neelan and I'll be very happy to answer. Thank you so much for joining us today. Take care. Bye-bye.